Hello and welcome to Re-enthused. Today we are looking at the FM Towns Marty. Yeah, a lot of people won't have heard of this one, and the name has quite a lot going on with it. But basically, the Marty was a fifth generation console released by Fujitsu. The FM Towns part comes from the range of computers that it was based on. And yes, this is a very early example of a console made using PC like components. As you can see from the data blast that should be covering most of the screen now, it even ran on AMD based 386 CPU. Now, the similarities don't end there, as well as a CD-ROM drive. The Marty also had a 3.5-inch floppy drive and even a PCM-CIA Type 1 slot, something which was mostly seen inside laptops. The floppy drive was mostly used for saving data on compatible games, as well as allowing the Marty to boot some of the FM Towns games that required a floppy for boot up or for as a form of copy protection. The PCM-CIA slot, however, was just used for really SRAM cards, so you could kind of increase the storage to save internally. But there was also a modem release, although not really used. As I mentioned briefly above, the Marty was compatible with a few games from its big brother PC. However, it was kind of limited because the Marty's got obviously an unexpandable 2 megs of memory. You could buy an expansion actually, but it just didn't work very well. The speed of the slot meant that it kind of effectively slowed the machine down. Like some games, I think like Street Fighter 2 took advantage of it and things like that. Now, the reason you may not have heard of this machine is because it was a massive, massive flop. It was quite expensive when it was released in Japan, and the PC range, the FM Towns PC range it was based on, was not particularly successful either. They kind of all went head on with NEC's PC98 range, which was way more popular. A little later, Fujitsu released a kind of a cost reduced version, which they called the Marty 2. And although they called it kind of the Marty 2, there was no real improvements. It had a darker case, and they cut the cost of some of the components so they could drop the price. But there was kind of a rumour that it had a better CPU, but in fact it's the exact same CPU in there, same clock speed and everything. So it's literally just a cost cutting exercise. Unfortunately, at that point, Fujitsu had effectively given up on the Marty because it was losing a ton of cash, and so they pulled it themselves, which is kind of a shame because there was like a noticeable uptick on people buying the Marty 2 compared to the Marty 1. Unfortunately, because of this lack of sales, the machine never ever left Japan, which is a shame because not only a nice looking machine, but it had good build quality. And although there aren't a large amount of games, there were some fairly good ones on there. Like there's a fairly good Outrun Turbo port, which you'll see on the screen at the moment, and a pretty good Splatterhouse port as well. And there's also a game called Viewpoint, which reminds me a bit of Zaxxon, which is one of my all-time favourite games, so I'm quite partial to that. It's very pretty looking as well. Right, well, in terms of collecting this, there are a few things that make that difficult. Just getting hold of the machine in the first place is pretty hard. They are out there, but you're obviously probably going to be importing this, depending on where you are, obviously. And mostly from Japan, although weirdly enough, mine came from Poland. And also, you need to get the 100 to 110 volts to it being a Japanese machine. So say if you're in the UK like me and you try to plug that straight into the mains, you will blow it up, so you will need a step down converter. The machine's pretty reliable day to day. It's the main things that tend to go wrong are the floppy drive, which although is near impossible to replace, you don't really need it. You can get away without using it and use most of the Marty games without any problems. The problem I had with my Marty when I got it is the CD-ROM was basically okay, although they obviously can suffer from the same thing that all CD-ROMs suffer from, where they need to be cleaned and they need to be refocused on the lens. But my one wasn't reading CDs because the capacitors in the PSU had kind of dropped out of range. I applied a cap kit to it and it's working fine now, and those cap kits are still available online, although there are 2 types of PSU that could be inside the Marty. So you will have to open it up and read it, although it's fairly obvious once you get in there which one it is. So it's pretty easy to work out which one you need. Now, the much bigger problem when you're collecting are the games. They're incredibly hard to get, and as such, they command a real price premium. Games tend to go for anywhere between £80 to £400. Now, whilst I never support piracy, I think it's always best to own the game for lots of reasons, including even if you aren't technically supporting the developers anymore with these old machines, it's still, I think, the right way to go. But the Marty hasn't got any copy protection on it, and piracy is unfortunately probably the only way you're going to end up playing quite a lot of these games, because there are some games you just can't get hold of. I've never seen them for sale, not on the Japanese auction sites, not in eBay or anything. So unfortunately, just occasionally you don't really get much option but to use piracy. The Marty by default comes with a gamepad, but if it didn't go with it, which mine didn't, you can just use most MSX or X68000 joypads. There's also a fairly easy mod you can put onto a Mega Drive joypad to make it compatible, so there are plenty of options. Right, well, do I recommend the Marty as a collector's piece? It's tricky to get hold of. You probably won't have any original games, or at least you'll be paying a lot of money for original games, and you're going to probably be spending not just a load on the console but also on delivery, again depending where you are. But even with all that, yes, I do actually recommend it. It's a stunning piece of kit. It is one of my favourite looking consoles, even though it's basically just a curved shell. There's just something about it, it's very striking. Plus, it was one of the very first proper gaming dedicated x86 based consoles, and just because of that, I think it's a genuine piece of gaming history. Despite its poor performance, it's earned its place in the gaming history. Well, thanks for watching. We'll be covering more of Marty's games in later videos, including this Outrun port, which we will cover in a Sega arcade port episode, where we have lots of different Sega arcade ports that went onto lots of different platforms. So keep an eye out for those. But for now, goodbye.